Alrighty, welcome back to iFishNews. Your host, Glenn, City of Yala Fishing Field Team, COAF Field Team. And this round that we're talking about is Learn to Fish by Our Trials and Errors. And well, recently went out to Lake Lavon to do some jugline fishing. We ended up taking the kayak as well as the john boat. We got some great video of the action. And well, we'll talk about some lessons learned that we took this time. So let's go and start out with bait. Well, you got to have bait. Well, lesson learned this time. Well, be prepared to go and pick up some bait from the local bait shop because the shad weren't there. There was a front that rolled in, dropped the temperatures in the 50s. It was kind of chilly that morning and actually windy. We headed up to Highland Park, which ended up getting the wind in our face right at the boat ramp and had some pretty hefty waves. And after about 15 minutes or so of casting the cast net, well, ended up only with 3 shad, so we had to make a change there. So yours truly opted to the team. Then let's go run up the road up to the Branch convenience store, just across the bridge over there, from Highland Park over to Bretonia Park, and right in between there is this place called Branch, Texas, and there's a convenience store at the end of the bridge. When you go in there, well, we're hoping they had some shad. Unfortunately, they didn't. They did have some shrimp. They had some Nightcrawlers as well as minnows, so we just opted for a box of Nightcrawlers just to get the jug line started. And then we were hoping that maybe we might have a good chance at maybe some shad elsewhere. And so, lesson learned, got to have bait. Luckily, we had our backup plan with stopping over there to get some Nightcrawlers over there at the Branch convenience store. Additionally, the wind was just really kicking up, and there's always a way to find at least a place where you could fish, especially when you're fishing Highland Park in that one cove that we particularly fish fairly often. So you got Highland Park, and then right across from that same cove is Bretonia Park. And so right off the bat, we knew that because of the wind direction, I think it was an east-southeast wind, that if we went over to Bretonia, it'd be a lot more calm. And sure enough, it was. So we went out there, and yes, we did find a good place to get started. So set out the jug lines, put out some Nightcrawlers, actually caught enough shad that we could put out the rest of the jug line. So we went out with a dozen and fished it for a good hour, 2 hours plus with barely a bite. It was getting kind of brutal, and we're making some adjustments in the pattern, starting out shallow, going over to a deeper section of Bretonia Park where they've got that old hunting club lake that's now flooded. Fished that first little pond lake thing, and then we went off to the other side, and that was around 11:30, 12 o'clock or so, and guess what? The bite picked up. And so we were able to get 6 in the boat, 5 blue cat, and a 6 catfish, in this case a channel cat, and of course it went for the Nightcrawler. Everything else went for the shad. Did lose about 3-4 other ones that were on the line as we were bringing them in. Lesson learned, especially from yours truly. Well, you need to, when you're raising your jug line, not to wind the line onto the jug. Go ahead and just bring in the line and let it flow behind you. Because what happens is as you're winding the line on the jug, you're giving that up and down motion, so it's causing some slack in the line, and guess what? The catfish is able to get away. And so from one of our fishing buddies, reminded us, don't wind the line, bring it up hand over hand, keep the tightness on the line, make sure it is still have that strain so you can feel that catfish, and don't let it loosen up or it's going to roll off and twist off the line. We were using J hooks as well as circle hooks. The circle hooks tended to keep them on better and kind of hook them on the side. But the J hooks tended to get, I guess, a better hook set when they weren't really taking the bait. So we could tell that with the J hooks, where they just barely got on there and took the bait and ran off with it, we were good. In the case of the circle hooks, where they were kind of just taking their time, really just mouthing the bait, a lot of them were lost at that point. In fact, I think the biggest one that we would have had was on a circle hook that was just barely in its front lip area, which isn't normal for a circle hook. What I think was happening was we were using a shad head, fairly good size one. I think the catfish just had the shad head in its mouth, and it was the hook piece that was just sticking out. because that didn't really quite look like it was hooked at all. So some lessons learned this round: kayak fishing, specifically jug lining, as well as using the John boat. Key lessons learned this round: have the bait, have a backup plan if you don't have bait, and then play the wind, adjust the wind to the conditions of windy conditions. And so in this case, we were in one part of the lake where it was really windy, went over to the leeward side of that cove, and guess what? We were able to make it a day, and then put our jug lines. Third lesson learned: when you put out the jug lines and you're bringing in your catfish, make sure you don't go and roll the line as you're winding it back onto the jug. Instead, just bring up the line, keep that tightness in the line, and make sure that you don't get any slack so that catfish rolls off or twists off. And then lastly, in the case of jug lines again, do pay attention to the pattern. So if you're not getting any bites in a particular area, we set up a triangle pattern of threes. We had 3 sets of 4, or 4 sets of 3 jug lines, and we put a pattern shallow. We would put a pattern a little bit deeper, and then another one deep, and then back up in another point in the, or I guess a hump in the little pond lake thing that we were fishing. And then when we were getting anything there, just go ahead and move your jugs over to another portion and see if they're biting. And in this case, once you do get the pattern, move all your jug lines over to where that pattern's working. So you'll see in one of the videos that we'll post here, there'll be a line of jugs just right where we were getting a bite. And it was kind of like a little slope in the bottom, where they were just kind of hovering about, maybe 6 to 8 feet of water, and it was just right on the edge of that submerged pond or lake thing that used to be its own standalone pond. And by doing so, we were able to get the catfish and have ourselves a pretty good fish fry. So tasty stuff. Did a blackened fish recipe, catfish recipe, with a little bit of oil and butter and a lot of spiciness to it, and we got it cooked up, and it tasted really good. Put on a bed of rice and then threw some of that etouffee on there, and so that made a pretty good meal. And we'll throw some pictures in there as to how it looked or what we ended up doing with the catfish. Alrighty then, so all for now, and do stay tuned for more. We'll keep doing this throughout the season, and hopefully y'all can either do a listen or have a listen on iFishNews, our fishing podcast, as well as on our YouTube channel, COAF Field Team, City of Island Fishing Field Team. Alrighty, your host, Glenn. Until next time, we'll catch y'all later.